Yes, we've modified this a little bit, but we're still going to be in for a good talk. It's a very interesting talk of what's going on. We'll just stay in the shaded areas for right around here before we actually go down to the what I'm referring to on this tour is the viaduct, because that's what is referred to in the reports from the Confederates that attack Lieutenant Davis's command. And I'll get to that here in a couple minutes of how Lieutenant Davis gets to be the commander here of the Union pickets that day. So to start off, we're going to move down here in front of this tree where we can actually see what I refer to as the skirmish line, the far advance of the Union skirmishers that day. And I'll go through the placement of the companies, and we'll even go as far as to talk about some of the Confederate units and even introduce you to a couple of the men that I'll be quoting from throughout this tour as we're heading down to the viaduct. So we'll just turn around right over here, go over to these flags right here. On the morning of July 9th, 1864, the fighting actually did not start right here behind me in these fields. The fighting actually starts about 3 miles north of here at Jug Bridge. But we're not focused on that right now. What we're focused on is what happens from up here on the road that you came down on to the railroad bridge. This is the only area. And to get you have a better understanding of what I'm talking about, y'all know a corps, right? Corps is made up about 3 divisions. Then you got a brigade. It's got about 4, sometimes 3, maybe 4 brigades. Then in those brigades, you got sometimes about 4 regiments, average. And in those regiments, you got companies. For the Union, we're talking the company level. For the Confederates, we're talking a whole division of 3 brigades. 2 North Carolina brigades and a Virginia brigade. One North Carolina brigade is going to see a lot of fighting. The other North Carolina brigade is not going to see that much. And then the Virginia brigade is held in reserves. There's going to be close to 3,000 Confederates bearing down on between 300 and 500 Union skirmishers throughout the day here on July 9th. That's the numbers we're talking about. And these Union soldiers are going to put up a stubborn defense that, to me, is one of the epic fights of Monocacy. If these bridges are lost by midday, the battle could be different, would be different. Probably be more captured, and it could even allow Early to get to Washington sooner. On the morning of the 9th, there's already 2 companies of a Maryland detachment out here from the 1st Maryland Potomac Home Brigade, Company C and K, under Captain Charles Brown. There's then 10th Vermont under Lieutenant Davis. Then there is a Company B, 9th New York Heavy Artillery, stationed around the bridge. They're going to be the ones that go and get the orders to burn the bridge. Also out here from the 9th New York is Company M and Company F of the 106 New York Infantry. And these units are going to be what's going to face Stephen D. Ramser's whole entire division. You're talking 3-to-1 odds, and these men are going to hold. The first men out here is the Marylanders. Then the Vermonters come out on the right. The New York companies are going to come out here, and they're going to extend down beyond the gravel road down into this field here. As the first shots are about 8:30, a company of men, vedettes, your outer skirmishers from the 8th Illinois Cavalry comes riding down the Georgetown Road. riding right through the skirmishers saying, they're coming, they're coming. Well, down here, these Marylanders see what looks like a bunch of blue uniforms. They do not open fire at first. Suddenly, that blue line that they're describing is actually Confederates, and they open up. And as they open up, they're going to pour a massive volley into the skirmishers, but they're in a thin line. They can hide, they can duck. They're in involts of about 10 spaces in between. This is not line-to-line fighting through here. Almost none of it with the Union is line-to-line fighting. It is completely all skirmishers. These Union skirmishers along here holds that line for an hour. Eventually they start getting pressure on their left, and they start falling back here through the Best Farm. Union troops, skirmishers, end up into the railroad cut. They start hiding in the railroad cut, shooting at the Confederates as they come through here. But Ramseur gets nervous, realizes that there could be more over here than what he's facing. He orders them to withdraw. That is the first attack. Second attack is going to start at about 11 o'clock. And it's going to be tragic, a little bit tragic for the Best family here. This is John T. Best, and this is his wife, Margaret. His father has left here. David Best has retired from farming, has a new home north of here. And they're living here with their family and a few enslaved individuals. When the Union is being forced back through the trees here, Confederate sharpshooters come into a barn about right up here where the overflow parking is. And they're going to take position and start shooting on the skirmishers. Well, men from the Alexander Baltimore artillery see puffs of smoke coming from the direction of the barn. So they start lobbing exploding shells into the house. And the shells are like this half one I got here in my pouch. About 4 of these, according to one of the cannoneers, is going to lob into the barn. And on the 4th one, they see ploofs of smoke coming from the barn as it's been set on fire. These balls explode in the barn. And with that, the sharpshooters are running out, and there's ambulances coming up to pull out the wounded. As the attack unfolds, the second attack, the Confederates end up coming out here more to get a flank on the New Yorkers that are right over here. These men start pressing forward on them, and they start falling back, and eventually they're going to make a right angle. But by this time, McCausland has crossed 2 miles south of us and is starting to push on the left. And he'd been ordered the night before, find the left and attack it by Early. As they start falling back, the Lew Wallace is going to start getting itchy and is going to order for the bridge to be burnt. So let's go ahead and head down here along the trail. We'll stop about halfway down, and I'll pick up with the New Yorkers. I told you I was going to explain how Lieutenant Davis gets command. When the enemy advanced about 8:30 in the morning along the pike from Frederick City, Captain Brown allowed them to come within 50 to 20 yards of our position. Thinking they were Union troops, dressed in blue clothing, which they had recently captured at Martinsburg. I shouted protestfully, telling him our friends were behind us. He was convinced when one of the men was killed and several wounded. He then suddenly turned to me in disgusted and instantly upon me taking command. I assumed command instantly and brought up the 10th Vermonters to the point. After a severe fight for about an hour, the enemy retired. So everything I was just talking about up in front of the Best Farm house, that's right out here in these fields. But gradually, they're going to start withdrawing back through these fields, down in this ravine, up into this railroad cut. Then they're going to start gradually turning and forming what I refer to as a right angle off of the junction back down to where the covered bridge is. By 10:30, McCausland has crossed at Worthington Ford and is moving towards Rickett Flank. This ravine that we're in right here is actually going to be used by some members of the 23rd North Carolina. They're actually going to come into this ravine, and they're eventually going to use the viaduct, go through the viaduct, and they're going to get onto the left of what's the remaining Union skirmishers on this side. It's a very intense fight, and this flank attack by this company will actually cause Lieutenant Davis to eventually retreat, with also seeing his division's flags. That said, we're going to head on up here onto this little rise towards the viaduct, and we'll pick up on the second attack. As we go on, I want to go ahead and introduce the men that we're talking about. Lieutenant George Davis, Company D of the 10th Vermont. This one will give y'all a good laugh. Lieutenant LaForge. If any of y'all are interested in Star Trek, yes. This is Monocacy's Lieutenant LaForge. He takes over command of Company F of the 106 New York after the commanding officer is wounded and gets captured here. For the Confederates that we're talking about, this is Lieutenant Colonel William F. Davis of the 12th North Carolina Infantry. Colonel Thomas F. Toone, 20th North Carolina Infantry. Remember him, he plays a key role at the end of this. Colonel Charles C. Blackwell. He commands the 23rd North Carolina that comes eventually right through here. He also is in command of the second attack on the bridge. So now we're up to about 11 a.m. The second attack is much more severe, with remnants and parts also of Lewis's brigade. They gradually push towards the Monocacy covered bridge. Wallace starts to get nervous. He knows Ramser's got a whole division out here and at any moment probably could overtake, but he's fighting in his mind. Do I burn the bridge? Do I take the risk of Davis and his men getting captured? Do I leave the bridge unburnt? Think about that as we head on down to the viaduct next. He knows he has to go out to burn the bridge, and that's going to happen about noon. This is from Captain Blackwell. A considerable force of the enemy were in the railroad cut, perfectly protected. The 23rd under Colonel Blackwell made a dash for the blockhouse, but we were met with a hot inflating fire from the line of battle in the railroad cut. A heavy battery across on the other side of the river at the other blockhouse on the east banks. They're going to fire a shot over at the Confederates as they're trying to take the blockhouse. But because of the well-protected position of Davis's men and the 1st Maryland, they're going to hold off that attack. And with help from that battery, one 24-pounder howitzer, that's going to allow them to hold their position But remember, in these fields, it's a gradual push. By now, the Union's starting to draw through the railroad cut. The Confederates are starting to turn the flanks. The New Yorkers are going to start feeling heavy firing. The New Yorkers are the first ones to be pulled out. They're going to be pulled back before the bridge is burnt, and the rest of them's going to have to go through the water. The Marylanders will be then the next ones to leave, leaving just the Vermonters. All right, so let's head for the viaduct, where I know we'll have shade. We determined to bother the Johnnies a little and commenced firing at those who were fording the river. Now in that, he's talking about the attack by the 12th North Carolina. Some of those men are going to actually try to ford the river, but it's too deep for them to get across, and they're going to come back. When he seen them cross the railroad bridge, he then moments later overtook General Wallace's retreat column towards the Baltimore Pike. This is from Colonel Thomas F. Toone. The 20th North Carolina, over in this direction, swept a farm perpendicular to it and swept down the direction towards the bridge. I crossed my regiment of the railroad tracks, from which there was concentrated fire from the bridge, with the loss of the 3 men wounded and the charge the enemy from their works. Some of the men charged across the river, but the water was too deep. He's recounting the Confederates. So LaForge and those men are shooting at the men of the 20th North Carolina. After crossing the railroad bridge, reformed the regiment and pursued for 2 miles. From Lieutenant Colonel Davis of the 12th. Now Wallace begins his retreat. I moved forward and struck the bridge, seeing the troops of the Union retreating and Davis's men now on the other side. He takes the Confederate flag of his regiment in a Hollywood thrill type way and leads them across the wooden bridge. Now Davis will write in the 1880s a report that is published in the 10th Vermont Regimental History. For years, the only report that about the fighting over here is from the 1st Maryland Potomac Home Brigade from Captain Charles Brown. Well, we know how much he did. He gave up command over here. He ended up writing a whole report, Lieutenant Davis did, about their stand. And because of it, we actually now have better accounts of what happened on this side and the heroic stand that these men make. With the stand made here, as they're retreating across the bridge, we could actually match this picture that's in our museum up almost with the way the terrain is here today. You can see Davis's men down here in the railroad tracks, and the Confederates coming around the junction and firing down in on them. You can then even see the Vermonters retreating in the sketch drawing, engraved drawing, across the railroad bridge. Davis will write, one of the men fell 40 feet into the river and then would be captured and sent to Andersonville. And Wallace will order one of his staff officers to ride down and find out who's been commanding those troops. His staff officer comes back and says, "Sir, Lieutenant George Davis of the 10th Vermont." He went, "A lieutenant? A lieutenant is who's commanding those troops? Isn't there a captain over there?" Well, Lieutenant Davis has been commanding this detachment of skirmishers of the different regiments all day, and will go on to receive one of the 2 medals of honor here at Monocacy that day for his stand. Wallace will write in a letter describing the fight at Monocacy and the decision to burn the bridge, which still haunts him to that day. Do I burn it or not? The last time Wallace would look at the skirmish line, they were still fighting. He would learn later that night that Davis and some of the men did escape and rejoin their command. Everything that Davis and these handful of skirmishers did against these overwhelming odds really laid on how long they could even fight on the east side against Gordon, how long the Ohioans could hold Jug Bridge, comes down onto what happened in this part of the field. this little thin skirmish line goes, there goes all of Wallace's whole command, could be destroyed in detail. Stephen Ramseur could break through, Breckinridge could follow with other troops, and they could completely separate Wallace's whole command, taking them out in detail, capturing more prisoners than what was captured here. In conclusion, as Wallace said in that letter years later, to save Davis was to save Washington. Thank you very much.